This is New Zealand, just south of the Pacific Ocean. About 4,000 came from Australia, the second most peaceful country in the world. Most of the people living in India and Pakistan, like me, know New Zealand because of cricket. Brendan McCauley, Ross Taylor, Daniel Vittori, I knew New Zealand because of them. But New Zealand is very famous in the world, especially for its big mountain ranges, beautiful lakes, and high-quality organic food. Some of you may already know that the famous movie Lord of the Rings was also shot in these beautiful valleys of New Zealand. The weather in New Zealand is just like that of the UK. Light heat, long winters, and good heavy rains. But despite this, the population of New Zealand is not even 7. If you see this map of New Zealand, you will see that nearly 80 of New Zealand is empty, and no one lives there. 70 of New Zealand's population lives in the north, and 50 of North's population lives in this one city, Auckland. Such a beautiful weather, beautiful scenery, low crime rate, and high standard of living. Why is 80 of New Zealand empty? Let's find out the answer to this question in this video. First of all, if we look at the world map, you will notice that New Zealand is very far from our rest of the world. That means if you were on a plane from Karachi or Mumbai, you can cross the entire Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean and reach New Zealand after 22 hours of flight. And now the question arises that how did man reach this island so far from the world? Now there are multiple views here. If we go to the official website of New Zealand, it is shown that about 1350 years ago, Maori people discovered New Zealand. All these islands of the Pacific Ocean, which are also called Polynesian Islands, were called the people who lived on them. According to official sources, Maori left all his islands around the 13th century and sat in large boats and reached New Zealand. This is about the same time when Mongols and Genghis Khan were taking control of the whole of Asia. The question is, why did they leave their old islands and come to New Zealand? When we did our research, we found out that there is a slight difference in Maori historical records. According to Maori traditions, New Zealand was discovered by a Maori named Kupe around 750 AD, not in the 13th century, but 500 years earlier. Kupe was a fisherman who caught fish for his tribe. But then it started that whenever he set a trap, his fish would eat the octopus found in the area, and nothing would be caught by them. Now, because their main food source was fish, a lot of problems started to be created. And the solution was the Kupe and his few companions would go to the sea and try to find some other island where there is a good supply of food. In this search, Kupe took 20 to 25 people with him and went down to the Pacific Ocean. After a few days of travel, they saw an island with big mountains. This was New Zealand. Seafood, sheep, goats, and fruits, Malamal Island, on which there was no other human being. This was the perfect place for his tribe. Kupe sent his few companions back to the Polynesian Islands so that they could inform the rest of the people of the island, and thus the Maori people began to settle in New Zealand. By the 17th century, the Maori people lived in New Zealand in peace, and because they were away from the world, they had no enmity with anyone and no danger to anyone. But all this was about to change very soon. It was a time when Western nations were spreading all over the world to increase their power. Explorers were being sent to discover islands, countries, and continents, which the European countries could use to increase their power. In this regard, a Dutch explorer, Abel Tasman, set out in search of a continent in the South Pacific Ocean, because at that time the Europeans thought that there would be a continent in the middle of the ocean. And if that happens, it will open many doors of opportunities for European countries. In 1642, Tasman discovered New Zealand, but when he tried to get down there, he had a bloody fight with Maori people and he had to flee. Then in 1769, a British officer, James Cook, reached New Zealand. Once again, James's soldiers and Maori people fought a fierce battle and many Maori chiefs were killed. James had to go back, but this time he made a detailed map of New Zealand and the whole journey. And through this map, Europeans started to reach this island in the 18th century. And this time, they dealt with Maori people in a very smart way. By giving them greed for trade and profit, Britishers started to build their naval ports there, and only after 100 years, the British took complete control of New Zealand. Between the British and the Maori people, a treaty was signed in 1840, which is called the Treaty of Waitangi. And after this treaty, New Zealand officially became a part of the European and British Empire, was around 2 lakes. But in the next 100 years, this population, instead of increasing, it decreased from 2 lakes to 40,000. And it had 2 main reasons. Actually, when Europeans came here, they also had the same diseases which were common in Europe at that time. The problem was that the immunity of these diseases did not develop in the Maori people. And that's why after the European immigration, local Maori people started dying of illness and died. In the second half of the 19th century, New Zealand was a very violent place. Only 5 years after the Treaty of Waitangi, a series of wars started between the British and the local Maori about land ownership, which lasted for the next 40 years. In these wars, many local Maori were killed, and finally, this whole thing stopped in 1880. When all the major Maori chiefs were killed and the Maori movement was completely crushed. Now, the Britishers also understood that the locals cannot be moved forward without including them in the development process. And that's why immediately after these wars, the British government made the locals a key stakeholder in every development project from the electorate process. And thus, the journey of peace and progress journey finally started. But still, as we showed you in the beginning of the video, why is New Zealand's vast area empty? And why do all people live here in Northern Ireland? Actually, this southern region of New Zealand is completely empty because it is nearly impossible to live or construct in this area. In the southern part of New Zealand, there are mountain ranges everywhere. There are high mountains all around this area, and the ground is so uneven that even basic infrastructure like roads and other things are almost impossible to build. The eastern side of the mountains is very dry and infertile, which is why there can be no irrigation here. That is why the majority of New Zealand government relaxed immigration policies after World War II. Non-white people were not allowed to enter New Zealand before World War II. And because of this reason, New Zealand's population remained stagnant till 1950s. And after this restriction was over, people from Asia, especially China, Philippines, and India started coming here and settling down. And finally, New Zealand's population started experiencing a much-needed boom. Today, almost 27% of New Zealand's population are immigrants or people who were born outside of New Zealand. The majority of immigrants live in Auckland and its surrounding areas. And this is the reason why Auckland is one of the least affordable cities in the world today, because land supply is less and housing demand is high. To solve this problem, the New Zealand government is now giving people grants up to $8,000 so that they can shift 100 km away from Auckland to Waikato, so that the pressure on the Auckland housing market is reduced and prices are normalized. One very interesting thing is that all the agricultural industry in New Zealand is based on animal meat export. Is a lush green land due to which countless sheep, goats, and cows are found here. New Zealand's population is about 50 lakhs, while according to an estimate, the population of sheep and goats here is almost 3 crores. And that's why New Zealand is the country that exports the most mutton and sheep wool in the world. 95 of New Zealand earned $46 billion from this export. New Zealand is the 50th largest economy in the world, and the main source of revenue of this economy is agricultural export. $46 billion for meat export is an unbelievable thing, and it should be a motivation for India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, because these three are primarily agricultural countries. If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. These are all the sources from which we have consulted for this video. See you in the next video. Take care of yourself. Allah Hafiz.